Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Sharaad. With me, my guest, Professor Ahimsa Campos-Arceiz with the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. We're talking about elephants. We're also talking about the central forest spine policy, this idea of creating a contiguous set of parks across the spine of the peninsula in order to allow for animal mobility, and in particular elephants, because there are all kinds of other animals that Malaysian road drivers encounter. You'll see this all the time. You know, snakes and the occasional big animal that crosses the path of cars. Now, the Central Forest Spine policy is very interesting because it's about 10 years old now, isn't it? Yep. Why? Do you understand why it was first developed and what were policymakers even thinking?
The history is very interesting. So I think some people who were not they were not wildlife experts. It was a very common sense thing, you know. How is our wildlife going to move if we keep on building roads and fragmenting the landscape? So it came up within the government in an environment that was not necessarily the tree hugger community, where all the kind of people thinking about this. And it developed over time, and I can tell you, I came to Malaysia in 2011, and learning about the Central Forest Spine was one of the things that I found very exciting about Malaysia. It was very promising, this kind of vision, and it was really visionary and very positive outlook for the future. I must say that in this time, the implementation has been very difficult. It has been relatively weak compared to what we were expecting 10 years ago. But I think that has to do with many other policy issues that are in Malaysia.
And our federal structure as well. Correct. Many states as well bring together, state governments to bring together, put this in place. But so the idea was they had a sense of the need for this. Yeah. What you seem to have brought to the table is the evidence or the data to drive that policy or tweak it or make it a little better. Is that correct?
So what we tried to do were basically three things. One was to identify the most important forest blocks in Malaysia where we should focus on conservation to promote connectivity. Second is to assess these corridors. We evaluated 28 corridors that were part of this plan. And then, if the corridors were not functional, identify alternatives. So what we found is that most of the corridors, around 85% of these 28, are functional for elephants. So elephants should be able to move in these areas. That's very good news. So then the plan can be implemented. We can focus on protecting these corridors to promote the elephant movement there. There are these 15% that are not functional. We need to do two things. Either we do restoration there, or we give up that corridor and we find an alternative route to connect these forest blocks. The good thing is that we have the data to say, okay, if this doesn't work, this area might work better. And I think this is very useful for policy making and for decision making.
Right. So one of the other headlines, and I think it came out just this week, was an elephant that had been transferred from one part of the peninsula to the other, or the fact that we have many captive elephant populations that are somehow domesticated. I mean, is that, in some people's minds, this might be the solution? You just domesticate all our wild elephants and then keep them in large zoos.
That is one of our main fears. You know, people thinking, there's a very powerful narrative that is, when you have human-elephant conflict, kind of both parties suffer, people and elephants suffer. And some people might say, why don't we just take the elephant, we put in a sanctuary, and then we reduce the conflict and save the elephant. That is like putting a human in a sanctuary prison, and then it's not rescuing the elephant or saving the elephant. It's putting in captivity in conditions that elephants are not happy to be. So then, in my case, and I think in my group, we are not very extreme in terms of being against radical options sometimes, but in the long term we need to think about other forms of mitigating the conflict. We need to look at the coexistence. So then I think the idea of putting elephants in captivity is good for the visitors, it's not good for the elephants. If we want to have elephants in the wild, we need to deal with the conflict and with people living next to them.
So where do we go with this conversation? So we seem to have the basis of a really good policy, and if it could be implemented, we have a consensus among state governments, we could push this further. You know, maybe we need to drive the conversation with the public and get them to understand exactly what is at stake with this population. What do you think is the necessary conversations that need to happen over the long term?
I think people need to understand, particularly the public in Malaysia, need to understand the conservation value of this country. This country is so rich in biodiversity. People from all over the world come here to to admire the biodiversity here, and understand that this shouldn't be taken for granted, that we are in a biodiversity crisis that is real, and there are ways to conserve much of this biodiversity, but it will require changing direction a little bit. It will require compromising in some cases, and it will require looking for kind of holistic solutions. And in my case, I'm very keen on thinking of sharing responsibilities. So people like you and I who live in the Klang Valley and we love the idea of having elephants and tigers, maybe we should somehow contribute so that these elephants and tigers add value to people who live next to them, who often have a negative experience living next to them, like elephants coming into your plantation, eating your crops, or scaring you at night. So I think we need to find ways to add value to these people.
Right. Now, one of the things I do want to touch on before we end this conversation is the role of the university and your work here and the group that you've created and the young scholars that have now attracted to the work that you started. How important is the university in driving the kind of policy discussions that need to happen so that we have better policies?
Well, we need science, we need data. Without data, we are blind making decisions. So we need to generate knowledge that is factual, so we can use this for decision making. And we need people that are able to gather this information, interpret this information, and advise decision makers. So I think in that sense, both the science and the capacity are really key, and that's where the university can excel. So that we can generate this knowledge and we can train people. The next thing is the uptake of this knowledge by decision makers. And I think that involves all the stakeholders and involves more people. But I think that's where the next challenge is right now. So in our case, we have trained quite a good number of people at the PhD and master level. Malaysia is in a very good place right now in terms of expertise for wildlife. Compared with 10, 15 years ago, Malaysia has a great number of people in between 25 and 35 years old that know good science, that they know how to do things, just need the space and they need to be able to influence decision making.
Right, okay. Final minute, your prognosis for the future. Are you pessimistic, optimistic about us finding a reasonable solution, a happy solution?
I'm an optimist, a lot, but I think we need to change direction. So then business as usual is not going to work, and we see that the change is taking too long. So we know better. We need to implement this good knowledge that exists around, particularly in academia and some of the environments. We have very good ideas, very good knowledge. We need to transfer. We need to communicate this with the general public, and we need decision makers to really be part of this process.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Ahimsa. I've been speaking to Professor Ahimsa Campos-Arceiz, who is with the Faculty of Science at Nottingham University Malaysia. We've been talking about megafauna, an important, even though it seems a bit esoteric, a very, very important conversation to have when it has to deal with the environment in Malaysia. So thank you for being with me. This has been Consider This only on Astro AWANI.